I was born in Denver, Colorado in 1925, and my family was established here, and I lived here through a number of years, and then my father started being transferred around the country, and so I lived all over the country. I came back to Denver. The war had broken out. I was in a movie theater in Fort Worth, Texas on Sunday on December 7th and 1941, and became pretty apparent we were in a pretty serious situation. A couple of years later, or a year and a half later, I graduated from high school down there. We relocated back to Denver, which was originally our hometown, and I went nearly immediately to the Air Force. They put me in the basic training, and then I went here to Lowry to attend the armament school.
Okay, I'm going to go back, and you said the Air Force, so we can edit that.
Oopsie, Air Corps. The Army Air Corps, which I certainly know better. The Army Air Corps, because I had applied and had passed most of their tests, or all their tests, but they kept running a depth perception problem in my eyesight, and which eliminated me from flight school. So then I went through Lowry, learned about all the ordnance with turrets and guns and bombs and fusing and loading and disbursement of bombs and what have you. Here,
you talked about the armament school out
yeah.
here. Kind of describe what was going on out here at that time.
Well, they had the tarp. I was in Lowry. They had a Lowry 1, Lowry 2 in those days, and you entered in off 8th Avenue and went into Lowry 2, and that's where we had our classes in those conventional, they still have them, those wooden buildings, 2-story jobs, barrack type of configurations, and we were in there, and when we came over here for some classes, and they had the old Lowry bombing range, they would take us out there and we'd fire in 30mm cannons, learn how to work with fighter planes and fire between the props, timers that would fire between the props. We didn't have any of that, was not appropriate for any of our skills or requirements where we were, because we were the heavies, the B-24s. But anyway, so we were here, and some of our classes would be over here for like that photography school, which came in real handy when we were over there, because as you will see, the target pictures that I have were taken by those cameras that we were checked out with here at Lowry.
I think anyone who's been in Denver, who's been under the age of, say, about 40 or so, doesn't realize that this was really an airfield. This wasn't just a base.
That's right. Well, that came into a halt when the B-29 flew down 3rd Avenue and crashed at the hilltop. And that was, golly, when was that? And they shut down Lowry at that time. That was an east-west runway. They used to have two, a north-south and an east-west, but that east-west went down immediately, and and then soon after they just stopped all aircraft activity out of Lowry after the B-29 hit up here at like 3rd and Eudora, and that it just lost it coming in. They used to fly right down 6th Avenue and come in there and land the B-29. So this one went in about 3rd and Eudora, took out about a block and a half of situations there. Golly, that must have been like in the 50s.
I was wondering if this was during the war or after.
No, this was after the war.
That must have been when I was in service. I was out of.
It was in the 50s, I think, mid-50s, about when Ike was here, I would think, in that time frame.
I don't remember that, but I was off from 56 to 59.
Well,
And,
of course, Ike was here the early 50s, mid-50s,
yeah.
early and mid-50s.
Why
Go
would-
fishing with Axel Nielsen up at the Fraser, and then went to Tyndall Field, where I got my wings out of gunnery school, and then we formed our crew in Lincoln, Nebraska in B-24s, went to Gowan Field, Boise, Idaho, took our OTU there for combat training. and Colonel John Kane was the commanding officer there, and he ended up being the lead plane for the Palesti raid out of North Africa in B-24. So we took our OTU in Boise, and these veterans from North Africa and Europe were our instructors and taught us what and how to do what we might expect.
One of the guys that we've interviewed out in Broomfield was a navigator on B-24s in Southern Europe, but flew the Palesti.
He was on the Palesti, but
And
Killer
he
Kane,
talked quite a bit about Colonel Kane, Killer Kane.
he's quite a guy.
He swears by Killer Kane.
Everybody did. He was a wonderful leader. Everybody revered him, and he ran a wonderful ship. His flight crews, though we were in our training, our pre-combat training, he treated us as we were special people, and anything, the mess halls, the food quality and things like that, and was at our pleasure and based on our schedules, and we did night flying, day flying, and everything. But Killer Kane, John Kane, was quite a guy, and his crew members, or his flight crew members that we trained with from Palesti, were quite the guys too.
They had a lot of stories to tell, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, great guy, and when Gowan was a great experience. And then we started for England. We were going to Westover Field on a troop train, but they jerked 10 of us off and put us into Langley Field, Virginia, to take special training on a new technique of bombing that enabled you, through radar type of configuration, to be able to do bombing through cloud cover and things of that nature, which the new planes that we would fly one over would be configured or have that equipment in them. It was a bombing technique which you had to have, sort of like Loran, which they use for long-range navigation in aircraft today. This was the same concept. It had several electronic configurations right behind the pilot, down where the radio operator and navigator had their offices, so to speak. We were aft, back of the bomb base with the I had a Martin turret up there and a nose turret, which sometimes I'd let the bombardier, he was a lousy gunner, so but anyway, we got away from the bombardiers and even navigators, because our pilots had enough navigation skills, and we'd have one in the lead ship, and then that was about it for emergencies, and we could get to and from wherever we were going. But the H-2X was this electronic gear that we could see through the clouds. I mean, it was like Loran can see. Our aircraft, even today, have long range, or Loran, I don't know what that means. It's navigation capabilities through lousy weather and seeing, and they can even land, like airplanes can land in crummy weather. In those days, they couldn't. But we developed this H-2X technique, that we were trained and checked out at Langley Field, and we had that equipment in the plane we took overseas to Nadzab, New Guinea.
Did you use that much when you got over?
Not really. We didn't trust it. Technology we didn't really have to. Most of the time was CAVU, ceiling visibility unlimited. And we'd fly in CAVU, and we'd much rather fly by sight, and our targets were designed over good weather. If we got into bad weather, we would try it, but we had no proof, damage reports or results to prove or show. We did it. I can't tell you how accurate we were, but I can show you the pictures where we were accurate. And so we went through our training for H-2X at Lowry, or at Langley, and then went to Hamilton Field and picked up our plane and flew our plane on over to Honolulu, and then down through Johnson, Canton, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and ended up with the 90th Bomb Group, the Jolly Rogers, in Nadzab, New Guinea. Matter of fact, when not that has anything to do with, because it wasn't a combat experience. When we took off from Hamilton Field to fly to John Rogers Field, which happens Honolulu, which happens to be Honolulu International now. When we went in, it was John Rogers Field, and we had fuel consumption flights, and the ground crews were not all that great out in Hamilton Field. We're messing around with our engines, trying to get improve our fuel consumption, and we lost an engine about the point of no return. Well, they'd loaded us up with tent and other ordnance type of things, mostly tents and mail. We had a lot of mail, and we managed to pick up about 30 cases of booze in San Francisco and load it on our plane before we took off. And we lost an engine, and so we were somewhat concerned. We were overloaded. We had a lot of stuff on that aircraft, and we were fully armed with ammo and tents and what have you, and mail, and 30 cases of booze. So then we lost another engine, and B-24s really do not fly well on two engines particularly. So we started throwing things out. We threw the mail one out first, and we just started dumping everything, the tents and all that stuff, and we squeaked in. We were maydayed on our way into John Rogers Field, but we got in, but it was a squeaker. If it had been 100 yards shorter, longer, I don't think we'd have made it. So we landed, and we had to spend a few days there, and our collector rings burned around our radial engines had burned out.
The big question everybody wants to know, did you save the booze?
Well, we say, no, we didn't. We ended up with 10 cases. But that's because we were throwing it out damn near bottle by bottle. At the end, because we didn't, that was criteria that we didn't want to lose contact with.
You had something to tide you over while the engines
That's
were
right.
repaired.
And so anyway, we ended up with about 10 cases. And so we started flying our missions there, attacking Biak, Saigon, French Indochina, Wewak were targets down there, and started up northward to Biak and then into the Philippines, flying the invasions at Corregidor and Bataan, Leyte Gulf and Lingayen Gulf and all those. And then we moved our airfield into Mindoro, which we flew many of our missions out of there. We'd been flying French Indochina out of Biak and New Guinea. So we were hitting Hong Kong and then Okinawa. We flew the invasion into Okinawa out of Mindoro.
You know, you're one of the few that we've talked to that flew in the Pacific, and you really covered an awful lot of ground.
We covered a lot of real estate.
It was a different kind of bombing than we've heard about. You know, what kind of targets were you really after on so many of these? The invasions had to be really something.
Well, the invasions were, you know, there was a book written, I don't remember who it was called One Damned Island After Another. And I can't remember who wrote it, but that's the way our life was. We went from one damned island to another, doing Leyte, Mindoro, Luzon, and all of those in there, which we spent a lot of our time. We were hitting targets like White Cloud Airdrome in Canton, China, the Kowloon docks out of Hong Kong and Macau and all that. We were hitting those targets. South of there, we were hitting railroad targets, railroad bridges and things of that nature. One of our primary targets was securing Formosa. Everybody, when I talk to young people today, they don't know what Formosa is. It happens to be called Taiwan now. So we did all the securing of Formosa, and those were probably some of the most critical targets we had was that, and that's almost right across the harbor from Hong Kong. And so we did much of our flying, and a lot of the combat pictures that I have here in my briefcase, and my unit being the Jolly Rogers, the 90th Bomb Group, did all the heavy lifting for all that stuff in the South Pacific.
I don't think a lot of people realize they've heard about raids on Japan,
Hmm.
the things that came out of Tinian and later Iwo
Right.
Jima and things like that. I don't
They're
think a lot-
coming out of Saipan and those Guam and those places, and
I don't think a lot of people understand that there was a lot of activity over in China, and what you talk about Saigon. I don't think a lot of people recognize that you were bombing in that part of the world.
well, we did. One kind of interesting anecdote: our missions were sometimes pretty long, and we listened to Tokyo Rose. And she'd entertain us with all the wonderful music and jargon that she could come up with. She was a lot of entertainment. And this was like it was in April, it was close to my birthday, like the 14th or 13th of April. We'd were on our way to hit White Cloud Aerodrome in Canton, China. And she'd talk to us and we'd talk back to her, and she'd play a few hot records, Glenn Miller and stuff like that. And she says, well, hi, Jolly Roger. She says, you guys are going to hit White Cloud Aerodrome today. I got news for you. The Cherry Blossom Squadron is going to intercept you in 15 minutes. That was the elite Japanese fighter group. And so they came, but they didn't attack. They wouldn't screw with us as long as we were in formation. Now, you had 24 planes with the firepower that we had. They wouldn't stand a chance in the air, staying in the air, but they umbrellaed us, they shadowed us. And then they left, and we went up, and we did hit White Cloud Aerodrome. And then we came back, went right over Hong Kong, and we're on our way back. And she says, well, you guys apparently are happy with your successes at White Cloud. She says, I've got news for you. President Roosevelt died 15 minutes ago in Hot Springs, Georgia. So that's kind of a war story or anecdote that came up, and it was like April 14th, 1945.
Did you believe her when she said something like that?
Yeah, we believed her. She was very accurate. She knew our targets before we knew them. It seemed like.
Was your unit the only bomb group that was bombing that part of the world, or were there others?
There was one other, the 43rd, but they kind of dispersed, and the 90th got, as I said, all the heavy lifting assignments. The 13th Air Force were more over towards CBI. We all wore CBI patches because we were flying China and French Indochina and that part, Indonesia, that part of the world. And so there were B-25s. We shared a strip with them, but they didn't have the range that we had. They couldn't go to Hong Kong from Mindoro. They could take some shorter hauls, and we flew off the same strip with them. I have pictures of the strip, and then there was the book written about us. It's like a high school yearbook. That's what that book's all about, the Jolly Rogers. And one interesting thing comes to my mind, as I mentioned earlier, the Killer Kane, or Colonel John Kane, was our OTU instructor, and his crews from North Africa flew the Palesti raid. We got another exciting mission. It would be the longest mission ever flown by a B-24. It was 18 hours. And of course, B-24s had 2 bomb bays, fore and aft, and it was so long we had to put Bombay gas tanks in there to do it, to accomplish it. But we were going to hit the Balikpapan oil fields in Borneo from Mindoro in the Philippines. It was an 18-hour mission. In order to give us enough range, they put the Bombay tanks in, and we made 3 of those raids on Balikpapan oil fields, and we affectionately renamed them as the Palesti of the Pacific. So we were hitting the Balikpapan oil fields in Borneo.
Was the B-24 the only plane available at the time that could fly the range that you needed on those missions?
Yeah, the 17s really didn't have it. And of course, a lot of people don't realize it, but on Pearl Harbor Day, the Japs also hit Clark Field. And that was the only B-17s in the South Pacific were there, and they pretty much got wiped out between Pearl Harbor and Clark Field. And so there weren't any, and the B-24s were relatively new aircraft, but it had the capabilities of doing logistically what we would accomplish in the South Pacific, because our flights were quite long relative to Europe and ETO.
How long was your typical mission?
Typical missions were probably, well, it depended. We flew all sorts of it. The 18-hour was the longest one. That was Balikpapan oil fields from Mindoro. But usually to Hong Kong was about an 8-hour mission. Then go over Kowloon and then up to White Cloud. It was about an 8-hour mission. Occasionally we would have them a little bit longer up to northern Formosa, Matsuyama, and Takeo was the capital of Formosa. We went in there, that's where we ran into the most opposition from, not as much from fighter situations as it was from anti-aircraft. That was pretty heavy anti-aircraft. They were shooting us up pretty good going into Formosa.
Did you feel pretty fortunate that you were flying most of these missions over water? You didn't have to deal with the anti-aircraft like the guys in Europe did?
Well, that's true, and we didn't get any anti-aircraft activity and hostile activity until we started hitting Formosa, and then that was only over the target. And to and from the target, we were taking a lot of escape and evasion classes, and they'd keep us upgraded because we were flying different directions, north, east, west, south, all these things, and depending on where we were flying, it could be Dutch, it could be Chinese, it could be French, it could be anything. We carried walkie-talkie books with us, or I should say pointy-talkies, not walkie-talkie, pointy-talkie books that had the dialects and the languages. They had to convert it into, well, we could point what we wanted to say, or they'd say how we could say it with syllables that we would understand. So we used the pointy talkies. That was part of our escape and evasion. We would have an escape and evasion kit with us, and we'd have currency from it could be guilders, it could be Chinese dollars, in case we went down in the Philippines, pesos, and things of this nature, and we go through who to make contact, who to avoid, and how to behave yourself in those part of the world. The Chinese, if we ever went down, they were very gracious people. They loved us flyboys coming in, and if we were shot down, they'd do anything they could to help us, and they'd offer you their daughters and everything else to keep you interested in what was going on in their community. And they taught us how to behave under those circumstances. But they said, don't drink with them. Don't ever drink with those Chinese, because they cheat. You have to drink a half a dozen shots and they take one. Or drink water or tea or something. But they loved us, but they liked to play with our mind games.
Take advantage of the tourists, huh?
Yeah.
That's right. The out-of-towners. We were the out-of-towners. One thing about the Navy, we enjoyed them being in the area because we were told, don't ever go down. If you can, go down in the water. Don't land in the middle of one of these islands, because some of them are friendly and some aren't so friendly, and you're better off. We'll get you. We know you're up there, and if we know you're going down, we will have subs or something, hopefully close enough to get to you, and we'll pick you up. Go down in the sea, parachute in the sea, don't go into the land. Some of it was because it was mostly because it was hostile or bad land to be coming down on anyway. We didn't know what we would encounter down there. As a matter of fact, they're still there. You might recall, here a year or so ago, there were the missionaries from Kansas, and they murdered the husband, and the wife got back here. And those were in Mindanao. We flew the invasion of Zamboanga, Mindanao. But off the tip of there was these, and the Filipinos didn't like them either, but they were Muslim. But they were mean. They were the mean variety, and they were Islamic, and they didn't like anybody. And you went down there, you get to the sea because they'll cut your tongue out. They do all sorts of fun things. You won't last long down there with them. And we called them guerrillas, and they were anti-social, anti-Filipino, anything except their own. And they are the ones that got those, and this was just a couple of years ago when that missionary, that lady came back and they beat up her husband pretty bad. So there's this element over there in the southern tip of Mindanao, and I guess they're still there from what I understand.
They've been
And
fighting the Filipinos for years.
they're nasties. And so we avoided them. We did fly the invasion of Zamboanga, which is probably 50 miles from where they were. And that was the capital of Mindanao. Like Tacloban was the capital of Leyte, and that's San Jose was the capital of Mindoro. Of course, there's so many islands out there. Being the capital, it's not a prime real estate.
What about casualties on some of these flights?
Casualties when we first went over there were about 50%, but they modified there. We lose very few planes. There'd be 24 of us because there's 4 squadrons in a bomber group, and each squadron put 6 planes in the air, so that's 24 planes. And the casualties, sometimes we'd lose maybe 3 out of the 24 planes in the air. But as we worked northward after Leyte Gulf, our casualties from enemy action was nil, except for those planes that were shot down over Formosa. As a matter of fact, we were flying 3rd Squadron in on Takeo, Formosa, and our lead squadron was Commander Brown, or he was a Major Brown, was flying the lead ship, and he was not a popular commander. And we were flying the downwind leg, and he was flying the upwind leg of over the target of Takeo, and which was probably 20 miles away, but we could see. And all of a sudden, the lead plane was shot down, and everybody hollered, "They got Brown! They got Brown!" So anyway, they got Brown that day. And one of our squadron leaders was from Colorado. It was Wayne Van Arsdale from Pueblo, and he ended up a state governor and senator, House of Representatives. But Wayne Van Arsdale was one of our squadron commanders, and he was from Pueblo. My second pilot, was Merle Winnie. He was from Colorado Springs, and I mean this in the best ways, but he was a hell of a pilot. He was a wonderful pilot, and he was a happy home bread truck driver in Colorado Springs, and they made a pilot out of him. And I couldn't make it through pilot training because of the lousy depth perception, but he did. Merle Winnie did make it, and he was from Colorado Springs. And he ended up being my pilot. My original pilot was a college boy from the University of New Hampshire, Bill Killow. And so anyway, they replaced him and sent him to VASAC, which was 5th Air Service Command. And so he got promoted, and they gave us Merle Winnie, and the rest of our crew stayed intact. We had no casualties on our crew. We were one of the very few crews that came through with no casualties. But as I say, most of the enemy action after the Philippines was from anti-aircraft, and that's the way they got Major Brown on the target at Takeo.
When the casualties were tougher, was it
at
mostly,
the beginning?
Yeah, was it mostly fighters at that point that was doing it?
Yeah, mostly fighters. They were much more aggressive. The Japanese Air Force became a little subdued after they were not enjoying a heck of a lot of success. After we got there, after we got out of New Guinea and up to the Philippines, except for Formosa, the Japanese were not very effective in the air.
One other question I had is, were you ever involved in any naval bombing?
No, other than we coordinated with the Navy. We never, before I got there, like that picture shows, that a B-24 attacking a vessel, we didn't do any of that. we just worked with the Navy like at Leyte and Mindoro and at Lingayen, and they'd be pounding away, and then they'd stop them, and we'd fly in and do our trick and drop our eggs and take off, and they'd resume. We could see them. And when we went into Leyte Gulf, we flew the invasion there, and then they put us into Leyte. The engineers made an airstrip for us that was kind of a nasty experience. Out of the mats, or I don't know if the metal mats that enter, like mechanical erector set. Anyway, this is the first time we'd flown off of mats in the Leyte, and it was the rainy season. I'm telling you, those things were slick as snot on a doorknob. They land on there. You couldn't touch the brakes. You just had to gradually baby that thing to a stop, and it was a very short runway. I don't even think it was 3,000 feet, but they moved us in there, and the Japanese would try to bomb us out at night, and that's where MacArthur walked ashore with his pipe, was at Leyte Gulf, and we did the softening of the landing at Leyte Gulf, of the neutralizing of the Japanese situations at Leyte Gulf. And then they moved us in there for this short size there for several weeks, flying off those lousy mats.
I was going to ask you what kind of airfields you had to work with most of the time. Were they kind of improvised airfields?
Yeah, I can show you pictures of them. I have them right here. Of our Mindoro, which we flew most of ours out. Those island airstrips were great. They were coral. A lot of them were coral, and they were very hard. And they were tough on the tires, but they were good. They were often a little short, but depends how much you were carrying.
Were the planes, aside from any damage or anything, were the engines, the planes reliable?
Yes, our equipment. I mean, of course, you have to remember those radio. What do they have? 30 pistons in them, or whatever they were piston-driven, prop-driven, internal combustion-driven aircraft, but they were great. And once we got into Nats Ave, New Guinea, our ground crews were spectacular. They kept us flying, and we'd go out and get shot up a little bit, and they'd have us patched up. We'd be in the air. Well, we just flew another plane. We weren't assigned to one aircraft. Whatever plane was flyable is what we flew.
You're talking about the invasion of all of these islands. You were going in pretty much with the Navy, just softening things up for
Yes.
the troops then.
We'd see, matter of fact, the big, the 14 inchers, I can't remember, the battleships would be there, and they'd have a couple of them or several of them around, and they'd be shelling, and then we'd be coordinated, obviously, and then when they'd see us coming in, or our radio communications, they would stop their shelling, and then we'd come on in and do the bombings of the beach or whatever strategic target we have in the area of the invasion. We try to neutralize it as much as we could and get the Japanese attention as fast as we could.
Was this high altitude bombing?
Well, high altitude bombing today is 30,000 feet. We were not pressurized. We had open aircraft, and most of I think the highest mission we ever flew was like 11,000 feet. But we were coming in off the ocean that Formosa had, and even New Guinea. They had 14,000 foot mountains, but we'd get over the mountains and then we'd come in and make our attacks. If we were flying Formosa, we'd come in from the Hong Kong side, because all the mountains were on the eastern side of Formosa, and they dropped right into the ocean.
Did you typically fly pretty low while you were?
Not really. Just occasionally we always liked to do that, hot dog it around a little bit, and we'd come in and do a little buzzing. But was discouraged. Our company, our squadron commanders, they'd encourage us to do it, and if we'd get a little heat from them when they'd catch us doing a little buzz work. One thing that, I don't know, it's kind of an anecdote. I was here in Colorado, what was it, 2 years ago, when the Colorado Air National Guard F-16s went to Iraq and over there. they came back and they announced they'd be here at noon. And I was playing golf at Valley Country Club this day. And the F-16s came right down the Parker Road in formation, tight formation. They buzzed in the Parker Road, and we were looking up, waving at them because the valley's right next to Parker Road. And I don't know if they saw us waving out of our golf carts or jumping out of our golf carts and waving at them. And then they, of course, they buzzed a little bit downtown, came in and buzzed Buckley and landed. And I was telling the other guys, none of them were flyers, that I was playing golf with that day. I said, that's customary after every mission. We'd fly in formation and come low by the tower, and then we'd chandelle out and come in and make combat land, break off individual landings. And I said, that's the way you came home after every mission, every strike. These guys did the same, except they buzzed us at Valley Country Club and then buzzed downtown, and then came in and buzzed Buckley and came in. And I says, I have pictures of us doing it. In fact, here is one of the pictures. I think it's here. Yeah, here it is. Here is a picture of us in formation. I took a picture of this coming into Mindoro. And you can see us in formation, threes and following threes. And you can see our strip down below, and then we'd chandelle and come on in and land.
When you say chandelle.
Chandelle's a movement as you flare upward and then flare out and come in this instance, land or whatever else you're going to. It's an upward climb breaking off to the right or left. I can remember one day we were buzzing out of Lady, and I had all our gunners. I was flying the waist at that particular day. I always flew the waist because I was the armament specialist on the aircraft, and if anything went wrong, I had other gunners in the nose and the nose and tail turrets and the Martin up top. We had the ball turret removed, and we just had swing guns, twin 50s on a swing yoke and there was just a big hole in the bottom plane, and we'd use it manually, and the two waist guns out of the waist. So we do a little strafing if we were lucky enough to do that.
But one, I was going to ask you too, somewhere like Higashima, was there room enough to have many planes there? What kind of a runway?
Well, we didn't have any problems with room. I have pictures of that too here that I can show you. They're quite interesting. I have pictures of our bombs striking the targets in Formosa. We'd have to be debriefed when we come in, and we try to take as many pictures. Lowry had a photography school in those days, and we, as a part of our armament training, we had to come over here and spend a few days at Lowry at the photography school getting checked out on those big handheld suckers, and then the movie cameras that had the pistol grip that we used in training. But yeah, we had pictures where possible, and and then other than our oral debriefings after the missions we had that equipment available to us, and I was the one elected to be taking the pictures.
I was wondering a little bit earlier if you had any real feedback on how accurate you were after you got back from these missions.
Just we talked at our debriefing, and they would be happy with the results, particularly with the pictures that we took. That would be their first glimmer of how successful we were. And they weren't talking to the crews too much, but we knew from the pictures that we took whether we hit the target or not. And we were pretty good. We were doing toggle bombing. The lead ship in each squadron, there'd be 6 planes in the air, and we would be 3 in trail, would start the first, and we'd go over the target, and he'd open his bomb bays, and we'd communicate intercom, and we'd open ours, and the minute we saw his bombs go, we'd drop ours too, and we would determine what our interval of bombing. You could set it through the intervalometer from the bomb bays to the sequence and the distance between these bombings, the bombs leaving the aircraft. And of course, we might be carrying fragmentation. Could be flying different situations. I have pictures here when we were hitting the Japanese fighter groups up in Formosa, and we caught them on the ground one day, and I have pictures of them on the ground, but you can see our bombs. We were using fragmentation bomb in clusters. They would have maybe 10 or a dozen bombs in a cluster configuration, and they'd break loose from the plane, and then maybe 50, 60 feet underneath us, the cluster would open. I have pictures of them opening.
Is this a little bit like the Betty bombs that the Japanese were dropping? Those were fragmentation things, but they came out of one, didn't they?
I'm not,
They dropped on the runways.
not that
and-
familiar.
Well, fragmentation bombs are primarily designed against personnel and equipment. They raise hell with an aircraft. If it land next to it or within 10 yards of it, then the stuff would start flying around, and or personnel. So they were anti-personnel and anti-equipment ordnance type of damage. And then they moved us over to a little island called Ieshima off the coast of Okinawa, and they had brought us up and said we were going to be flying the biggest mission we'd ever flown in our lives or in our careers. And of course we were very wise and very all-knowing. We knew it was the invasion of Japan in our minds, but it was highly classified and secret, and they wouldn't tell us any of the details. And then they took us to briefing the day we were supposed to do this. Was August, like the 4th of August or something like that, 1945. And they said, they gave us our heading and where we were supposed to go north to Japan, and when we were kind of giggling to ourselves saying, yeah, you guys you're being so secretive, you're not telling us we're flying the invasion of Japan. We've already flown 7 invasions, but now we're yet to do the biggie. And so they called us back in. We were up about an hour and a half. Each squadron had 6 planes in the air, and they returned and told us we were carrying unusual ordnance. We were carrying 2,000-pound GP, general purpose bombs, and so we were called. They told us to dump them in the ocean and do not arm them. So I did not arm them. I left the arming wires in place, all that good information I learned here at Lowry. So we dumped the bombs, came back in. I think it was about August 4th. And they said, well, the mission, or we said as we got off the planes, we were all climbing out of our planes, and we said, who screwed up the invasion? Because we just knew that this is what we were up there for, and they said it was the biggest thing we were going to do in our military career, the biggest strike. And so they said, well, they dropped a big bomb on Japan, and in those days there weren't too many people in the world knew much about atom bombs. We certainly didn't, and an armament specialist, I didn't know anything about it. And so we sat around for a couple of days, and so they gave us another scramble. You're going on another maximum effort mission, and this obviously was Nagasaki. That we didn't know it was Hiroshima or Nagasaki. We knew the towns were there. There were IPs that we were familiar with. So we went off again, and this was the day of Nagasaki. Instead of calling us back in to come back and land, they said, go hit your secondary target, which happened to be Shanghai. So we went in and did some bombing of opportunity in Shanghai, and as far as I know, that was the only time Shanghai really got anything hit during World War II, was when we bombed them from Ieshima. They called us back in, or we returned, I should say, after our mission to Shanghai and bombing Shanghai. We came in, well, what happened to the invasion? They said, well, they dropped another big bomb up there. They said, and that's what you told us last time. That doesn't really tell us anything. They said, well, it was some special bomb. They think it's a chemical bomb. So they left us at that, and they debriefed us on Shanghai, and then the war was over a few days later. And matter of fact, and I mentioned earlier that our last mission, in essence, was Shanghai. We had a malfunction. The first malfunction we had bomb releases, and my pilot, Merle Winnie from Colorado Springs, he says, "They won't release, Paul, they won't release." And I went into the bomb bays. We were over the target, and I did it by hand. I just went through and released all the bombs by hand. I hit the release mechanisms. They have a release called an A2 release in each bomb position, and it would control the bombs from electronically, and it had electrical capabilities, but I just throw the lever and dump them out by hand. And that Shanghai was the only malfunction I ever had.
At that point, if you were releasing them manually, you had no real idea where they were going to fall.
Well, no, we were on a target line. We were flying down the river it was a target of opportunity. We had the green light to go hit Shanghai. It was the only time the Shanghai, to my knowledge, was hit by anything. I guess some of the guys coming in from Guam and the B-29s, they flew to that part of China, and sometimes, was it 5 minutes over Tokyo? That's where they went to bail out or crash, was in China.
Kind of a stupid question, but did you have anything to hang on to while you were in that bomb bay and trying to release these?
Well, yeah, it was a little snug, but because the catwalk's about 4 or 5 inches wide, and the bomb racks are on the inboard ones, and then there's the outboard ones. And I just reach in, I just loaded them all, or supervised the loading of them. And so I was very familiar. I nearly made a mistake, because when I went into the bomb bay, I reached for the top bomb, and that would have been dumb. And and then I started at the bottom and worked up. So I went to all 4 bomb positions, and I had 2 here and then 2 up about where you guys are. And I released them manually through the A2 releases there. And you'd be surprised how fast those bombs came in. I was very quick. I go boom, 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 boom. And they were out. They were in train. Bombs in train. I can show you what that looks like. I have pictures of that too.
People don't realize you're talking about those little narrow
Catwalks. Oh, the B-17 was out at Centennial the other day. Of course, the 17 was so much smaller than the B-20. I mean, of course, the B-29s are immense compared to a B-24. B-24 wingspan's 110 feet, and 110 feet in the wingspan, and it was a new type of wing. They called it the Davis wing, and we were the first ones to be flying that thin, skinny Davis wing.
We actually got lucky several years ago. It was the day before 9/11. A B-24 and a B-29 flew into Front Range Airport from the Confederate Air Force.
Confederate Air Force, yeah. They're out of Harlingen, I think.
We went out there that day because
Yeah.
it was the only day we knew it was going to be in the air.
Yeah.
And we got footage of both planes flying, doing flyovers,
Yeah,
taking off, landing,
yeah,
and we could see the difference between the 2 planes.
yeah.
And we were fortunate. Of course, the day after that was 9/11, and
That's
they grounded all the air traffic, so we never got to see them in the air after that.
Yeah.
But I was fortunate. I got the footage. I'll see if I can get you some of that footage.
Well, the B-17s were not very effective, and we replaced them in the South Pacific after they were, in essence, all wiped out at Clark Field and at Pearl Harbor, Hickam.
Well, I've got one other question. It's kind of a little off topic, but all the guys that we've talked to that flew in Europe, they talked about flying at high altitudes and cold temperatures, and you're obviously flying in tropical conditions.
That's right.
Did you ever have to deal with typhoons?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there was 2 typhoons up in Okinawa. They hit within about 7 days of each other, and we had flown into Okinawa. We were flying out on special missions out of there, and we happened to be there for the 2 typhoons that have some world-class renown. At least we were very impressed with them. And you have to remember, all these remote places, we were living in tents. We weren't living in barracks. We were living in tents, in squad tents. And so we got into Okinawa and we pitched our tents, and sometimes we were lucky enough the quartermaster would send a group in there and they'd pitch them for us if we were flying and had other priority assignments to do. But in some instances at Lady we pitched our own tents. And this big blow came in, and we were running outside because it was raining like the dickens, and loosening the tent straps on one side and tightening them on the other, and then old tents were swaying in the breeze, and we were pretty proud of ourselves. This was Typhoon number 1 at Okinawa, and we survived that one until the eye of the typhoon came, and the wind goes the other way. Well, it just wiped us out then, because we loosened everything on the other side, and the typhoon hit us, and we couldn't fly in typhoons anyway. And we get as many planes out of there if we had a place to go put them, but when you're in Okinawa, there's no place to go.
It's an eerie feeling when the eye goes over, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Deadsville. I mean, that eye, you're in the eye, there's nothing. You can't hear a thing. It's just dead. It's
kind of a misty green.
Yeah, it's strange feeling, and because it's been very active, and all of a sudden it just stops. There's no sound. It's still. There's no breeze. There's nothing, and it's eerie. It's an eerie feeling.
And then
About 10 days, we went through the whole thing again. Those are the 2 typhoons. The Okinawa had some renown as far, so we were in Okinawa for the 2 typhoons of Okinawa in '45.
they must have tracked them.
That must have wiped out a lot of equipment.
Yeah, and they try to get the flight surgeon. They'd give him a few tubifors to get some stability for his place of operations, to take care of the medical things that he had to take care of, and urgencies as they might be required. And the typhoon, that was, and then I even have pictures. We even had some of our mess halls were made out of that stuff. I also have pictures of them, and they're gone in a heartbeat. Then we cooled our heels for about a month, and actually I went back to Manila and got a troop. They wouldn't let. We were very irritated. They wouldn't let us fly our planes home. They were getting pretty tired. We'd ridden those horses pretty hard, and they were it was a long way from Okinawa or Ieshima back home. So everybody wanted to come home, and that was a logistics problem, getting everybody home. They immediately grounded us as well as our aircraft, and said, we're going to send you home on a boat. But it took a while before they could do that. And we went down. Some of us went down to Manila. We thought there might be better chances of getting hooked up with a boat to return. So we finally got on some troop transport, and they returned us to the mainland United States. We were about, it was 32 days at sea. And we thought we were going to go into San Francisco, which we were delighted. We had become enamored in our tender age of 20 years old at that by now. We thought that'd be pretty cool to go tear up and terrorize San Francisco, which we had done before we left on our overseas trip with the Army Air Corps. So we were diverted. There were so many ships coming home. They diverted us to Vancouver Barracks in Portland. So we came in Thanksgiving Day. We landed at Vancouver in Portland docking facilities, and we were barracked that night, and all we had was old khakis and the flight jackets, and it was a Sunday, as I recall. We went in town, and Portland was deader than the dickens. There's nothing going on in Portland. So they put us on a train, and we came back to Denver. And that was the end of the war, but that was Thanksgiving Day. So that was the end of my Army Air Corps career, and I ended up back in Denver and enrolled at DU and went to DU and joined Cherry Hills Country Club instead of a fraternity.
You did better than I did. I went the other way. I went to fraternity.
Well, I don't know. Whatever it was, my inclinations were my friends were all members and they were all playing golf out at Cherry Hills, and that's where I went, was Cherry Hills and DU. And I worked for Beatrice Food in Brown Cannon, and you're an old Denver person, you probably know who Brown Cannon is, married Sparky Gates. So I went to work for Brown Cannon with Beatrice Foods and Medigo Dairies.
When'd you get out of DU, just a curiosity?
Got out of DU in 1949.
When you were stationed here and gunnery of the armament school and everything like that, did you get much time off here in the city?
Well, yeah, and this is my home. I went home 350 Gaylord. And the couple of guys I hung out, I'd take them home with me. And we'd break a few military rules, like we'd get down to my house, and instead of wearing GI shoes, we'd put on our penny loafers and go down to Brown Palace or something in our khakis or our uniforms. And every now and then the MPs would pick us up for being out of uniform. Because we didn't like the GI shoes, we'd rather have our penny loafers on. But they nailed us for being out of uniform because we'd take those off and put on our penny loafers.
Where were the places the servicemen liked to hang out when they were stationed here? Was Brown Palace one?
Well, you're into a social thing. The higher guys, otherwise they just go to 3-2 joints on Colfax. And this one that I can't even think of, this was over 55 years ago. I just can't remember their names right now. I'll probably think about them tonight, and I wake up about midnight and recall our conversation. I can rattle them off one after another. There's a couple out by the Bluebird Theater across the street, as I recall. But of course, we were college boys. The BI was at 8th and Colorado was one of the places we hung out, and we knew the management and the bartenders and the staff there at the Boulevard Inn at 8th and Colorado Boulevard, right across from the hospital. That used to be one of our famous hangouts, the BI. Meet you at the BI.
Been there.
Well, you probably were DU. Were you at DU when I was there?
No, I graduated in 55.
Oh, so you were after me, because I graduated in 49.
But Boulevard Inn I was in, it was...
I can't remember. Schwartz, the guy that used to own, his name is Schwartz, as I recall.
Well, I was in there with a bunch of broadcasters.
Mm-hmm. It was quite a watering hole.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't a big place,
No, it wasn't.
but it was a good hangout.
It was. I'm amazed about
I remember Lawrence Phipps III had a kidney transplant, and he was in Colorado General across the street. That's where they started the stuff, and I went over there. He was a good friend of mine. I used to hang out with him a lot, and I used to go out and shoot at the ranch, and we would go over to the BI, and he was in his scrubbies. They must have thought he was a doctor. He was a patient. And I'd slip him out, and he and I'd go over to the BI and have a few beers.
After the war, have you kept track of any of the guys you flew with?
No, I don't know, our unit I kept track of Merle Winnie for a while down in Colorado Springs, and then I would read in the paper that Wayne Van Arsdale was doing the stuff here in the state legislature, but we never hooked up again. Now, I had, over the years, when this hadn't happened in 25 years, there'd be some old crew member or somebody out of the squadron, and they'd look my name up in the phone book, and they call it, and we'd go down to Brown Palace and have a beer or a dinner or something like that. And people would stop by that knew Paul was from Denver, and they'd look and see if I was still in the phone directory, and they'd call me up and say, well, let's go have a drink. I remember everybody was still pretty hyped up right after the war when we came back. And there's a little bit of testiness between the Flying Tigers and 6th Air Force, and we went to a bar over there on Downing about, my pilot stopped by, and we were wearing our flight jackets, and we had a CBI patch on, and there's a bunch of old 13th Air Force guys in this bar over there in Downing, and Downing in Colfax. My pilot stopped by, and we both were wearing our A2 jackets, and we had a CBI patch on one shoulder and the 5th Air Force on the other shoulder. We went in this bar over in Colfax and Downing, and I can't remember the name of it. I could drive right to it, but I don't think it's there. And it was kind of a rowdy place, and it developed quite a reputation. And anyway, we went in there, and a bunch of ex-fly boys and land guys, or CBI guys, that fly in the hump in India. And we were flying French Indochina and Indonesia and then northward. And they took exception as they said, well, you guys were in the 5th Air Force, wasn't in the CBI. And yes, we were. And we gave them a few things. And the conversation got a little testy, and they were juiced up a little bit, and we hadn't had time to get juiced up or whatever. But anyway, it was a controversial conversation. These guys from we flew the 13th. We know who you guys are. I mean, you're just putting our insignia on your shoulder, and they took exception to it. But we all ended buying each other a drink at the end. It was all over. It didn't materialize in anything too hostile.